David, and where we left off last week, David had just found out confirmation from Jonathan for sure that Saul was trying to kill him. And so now David is on the run. In fact, he has nothing with him, no weapons, no provisions, nothing. And so he goes to Ahimelech, the priest, and he tells Ahimelech, hey, I'm here on a secret mission from Saul, and I need some provisions. Do you have any bread for me and my men? And Ahimelech says, well, the only thing we have is some consecrated bread. And so David says, I'll take it. And then David says, well, what about a weapon? And Ahimelech's we're told he kind of trembles. He's like, why are you here by yourself? This doesn't make sense. And David says, oh, this is so urgent that Saul is sending me on. I didn't even have time to go home. I'm going right now. So Ahimelech says, well, the only weapon we have here is Goliath's sword. And so David said, I'll take it. So David takes the sword of Goliath and he takes some consecrated bread and he flees. Now one of Saul's servants happened to be there and overhear their conversation. So David flees to Gath, which ironically is where Goliath is from. Gath is one of the 5 Philistine cities that make up Philistinopolis. I just made that up. But it's like 5 Philistine cities in this area. And Gath is one of them. That's where Goliath was from. So ironically, here comes David into the Philistine city with the sword of Goliath. And we're told that the king that is there, each of those cities kind of has their own king, they recognize David and say, hey, isn't this David? He's been killing us Philistines. He's been hunting us down. So David, who's been promised the throne of Israel, who's been anointed by Samuel, who knows that God is with him and protects him, doesn't know what to do. He's by himself. He's in the Philistine territory. So he pretends to be insane. We're told that he literally acts like a madman and lets drool run down his beard, and he walks around and hitting the doors and the doorposts as he's walking through, and to the point where the king says, why did you bring a madman to me? Get this guy out of my sight. So back then, most of the time if they thought someone was mad, insane, instead of killing them, they would just let them live. They thought, okay, this person's got a curse on him, and they would just let him live. And I don't know. Anyway, so that's what they do. And so then David escapes and he flees. So he escapes Saul. He escapes the Philistines. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Saul's, Saul's, one of his subjects, his name is Doeg, and he was actually Saul's chief shepherd, He is the one that had been there and had overheard David talking to Ahimelech. And so Saul hears that David has flees, and Saul actually finds out that Jonathan had made a pact with David. And so Saul is he's just lamenting. He's like, is everybody against me? Is everybody, trying to plot against me and help David for the kingdom? And Doeg, which is that shepherd, the chief shepherd, he says, well, actually, I was just over and, giving an offering before the Lord, and I saw David, and Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and then gave him some provisions. And so Saul is so engulfed in jealousy and hatred and so determined to kill David so his son Jonathan can keep the throne that he says, send for Ahimelech and have him brought to me. So Ahimelech the priest comes, and Saul says to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Saul's so convinced that everyone is plotting against him. He's convinced that David is just looking for his chance to take him out so that he can become king. Because Saul recognizes, Saul knows that God's spirit of blessing is no longer on him, and that God is blessing David. So he's jealous, and he's won't listen to reason at all. A man in the office that worked with several attractive ladies would come home each night, and his wife was very jealous, and she was convinced that his her husband was having an affair on him. And if he would come home and had a blonde hair on his jacket, she would say, "You're having an affair with the blonde woman." And if he came home and there was a brown hair on there, he'd say, "Now you're having an affair with the brown-haired woman." Well, finally the man got tired of this, assuring her that no, he wasn't having an affair, that he went to the store and bought a lint roller. So when he was in his car right before he came in, he kind of cleaned all the lint and hairs off him. And when he went inside, his wife looked at him and burst into tears. And he said, "Honey, what is it? What's wrong?" And she said, "Now you're having an affair with the bald woman." Like that woman, Saul was convinced that everybody was out to get him. Saul was convinced that David was plotting against him, and so was everybody else. And so Ahimelech, the priest, he doesn't really know what's going on. And he says, "Hey, who of all your servants is as loyal as David? He is your own son-in-law, and you made him the captain of your guard." And he says, he's highly respected in your household. And then he says, "Was that day the first time I inquired of God on his behalf?" He said, "No, of course not. David comes to me often, and I inquire to God on his behalf." He said, "Listen, let not the king accuse me of any or any of my father's family, because I don't know anything about this whole affair." He says, I don't know what you guys have going on in your family. That's between you, but I'm not plotting against you, and I didn't have anything to do with this. Now, if you go in there and you read the text, we're told that when Ahimelech is asking David, "Hey, where's all your guys and where's everybody else and why are you by yourself?" that he trembled a little bit. I think he suspected maybe something was going on, but I don't think he was working against the king. I really don't. But Saul is blinded by his jealousy and ambition and paranoia to the point where he won't listen to reason anymore. And the king said to him, "You will surely die, you and your father's whole family." And we're told that Saul, you can see, we've seen him kind of becoming more and more unhinged, right? In these little outbursts, he turns to the guards next to him and says, "Kill this man and kill his whole family." And the guards and the other officials, they say, "Hey, we're not going to do this. You know, this isn't right. We're not going to go and kill the priests of the Lord. These truly are the Lord's anointed." So Doeg, the chief shepherd that was there, Saul turns to him. You can see him. He's kind of looking around the room. Who's going to do my bidding? And he sees Doeg and he says, "You kill the priests of the Lord." And Doeg does. Pulls out a sword, runs him through. And then Doeg and a couple of his guys, they go down, and we're told that they killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. The ephod, by the way, pastors, we used to wear robes, right? And then you'd have the stole on there. The ephod is like a linen, kind of like a robe, if you will, and it designates your office as a priest. And so we're told that he killed 85 priests that day, and also put to sword the town of Nob, including all the men, the women, the children, the infants, and even the cattle, donkeys, and sheep. Literally killed everybody and everything that was living in that town. So, Saul has come completely unhinged. Primal feelings can often cause us to do something rash that we normally wouldn't do, right? Love, that's a good feeling, love, but how many times have we acted rashly out of love, right? Or heard about that. But there are also bad feelings, as we see. Anger, hatred, fear, lust, jealousy, that cause us to do things we wouldn't otherwise do. After a long illness, a woman died and went to heaven. And as she was standing outside the pearly gates, St. Peter was there. And she said, "Well, what do I have to do to get in?" This is a true story, Jackson. And St. Peter said to her, "All you have to do is spell one word, love." So, of course, she spells it, L-O-V-E, and she gets in. Well, about 6 months later or so, St. Peter comes to her and says, "Hey, listen, I got to be away for the day and do some business. Would you come and just watch the gates for me?" So she says, "Oh, sure." So she's there, and she comes out, and lo and behold, her husband comes there. And she says, "Well, honey, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, you know, it's a strange story. After you died, that pretty young nurse that cared for you during your long illness, we ended up getting married. And then I ended up winning the lottery. So I sold that little house we lived in, and I bought this really big mansion. And my new wife and I have been traveling through Europe over the last 6 months. And she says, oh. And then he says, well, what? Anyways, we were traveling, and I was in Italy, and I was leaning over this cliff, and a little gust took me, and I fell over, and now here I am. She says, oh. And so he said, well, what do I got to do to get in? She said, well, you just got to spell one word. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Yeah. Saul is acting out of a mix of jealousy, anger, hatred, and fear. And we're told that Abiathar was the only one of Ahimelech's sons and their family that escaped. And so he went to David, and he finds David, and he says, listen to what Saul has done. He killed my dad, my uncles, my brothers. He killed our wives. He killed our children. He put the whole town to the sword. And David feels bad, but what can he do at this point, right? And he admits it to him. He says, it's my fault that happened. It is because of me. And he says, you stay with me and I'm going to protect you. So Abiathar becomes the priest for David. It's not really his fault, right? It's Saul's fault. At the same time, David had no idea when he was telling that little lie, when he was manipulating the priest, he had no idea what was going to happen and what the consequences would be. We can't blame David for lying. He's on the run for his life. His life is literally in danger. So he tells what he thinks is a little lie, a little manipulation to try to get away. This is the same with us. When we lie and manipulate others to try to get what we want in the short term for something, we have no idea what the long-term consequences are going to be. And hopefully that person and their family is not going to be put to death by someone else, right? But we don't know what the consequences are, which is why we're called to live lives of integrity. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. So David, he's on the run, and Saul is chasing him down. And there's this great scene in 1 Samuel chapter 23 where David's out, hiding out, and Jonathan finds out where he is. Saul's looking for him, and Saul's got a lot of men. So Jonathan finds out where he is, and he goes to him. And he says, don't be afraid. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. So Jonathan, he understands fully now. He knows that David is going to become king, and he won't have the kingdom. But he is content to be second to David. He's content to rule with him and not have to be the only one at the top. So, if you haven't been reading this, you got to go back and read this. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 21, 22, 23, and we're going to end with 24 in a few minutes. There's this scene, and you can picture this in your mind. It's almost like a movie. David and his men, by now he's got about 600 men with him, and Saul's got about 3,000 men, and he's chasing them down. And they're on this mountain, and David and his men are on one side, and Saul's on the other. And they're about to come around the side and converge on each other, when all of a sudden, at this last second, Saul, a messenger comes up and says, come quick, the Philistines have invaded. They're plundering our cities and they're killing our people. Come quick. And so Saul, to his credit, stops pursuing David and goes, and they turn around, and David just narrowly escapes. Well, Saul goes and they fight off the Philistines, and then as soon as he's done with the Philistines, he comes back again. And we're told that after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David's in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David. And they get to the spot where he's told David is hiding. They don't see him because David and his men are hiding in a cave. But Saul needs to relieve himself. So he goes into the cave. And we just read the scripture a minute ago. And we know what happens. Saul's in there. David's men say, this is it. Here it is. This is what you've been waiting for all this time. God has promised you the kingdom. This is from God. Now God has delivered Saul into your hands. And David has his chance. You know, in the heat of conflict sometimes, we feel justified in seeking revenge or settling scores, don't we? David had every right to kill Saul. It was self-defense. It wasn't even his own making. It wasn't his own selfish ambition. It was self-defense. He could have done it. But he chose to show mercy instead. This story challenges us to consider the power of restraint, especially when we have the opportunity to act out of anger or frustration. And in today's world with social media and cancel culture and constant division, it's never been easier to retaliate against a wrong or perceived wrong. Yet, as David demonstrates, true strength lies in showing mercy, forgiveness, and trusting God with outcomes. The ability to forgive and hold back from harsh words or actions is a sign of spiritual maturity. Do we return hate with love, or do we let resentment take root? That's a decision each of us have to make in those moments. David, he's a little bit of a prankster. He's still young. He's in his early 20s right now. And I don't know, maybe he's still a little immature. Maybe he's not ready for God to put him on the throne yet. Maybe there's still some shaping of him that needs to be done and some maturation. Either way, he comes up and he cuts off a little bit of Saul's robe. And we're told that even after he did this, you can see like his heart right now, that after he cut it off, he was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. And he turned to his men and said, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay a hand on him." So, David may want the throne, but he's not willing to take it on his own. David says, listen, it's God's will, in God's way, and in God's timing. God's will, and God's way, and God's timing. So David is exercising patience. So he sharply rebukes his men, and Saul starts to go out of the cave. Saul gets just a little ways out of the cave, and David comes walking out and says, "Yoo-hoo!" All right, he probably doesn't say that. But he calls out to Saul. And he calls out to Saul, and he says, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, he saw David bowing down and prostrating himself in humility and respect with his face to the ground. David humbles himself before the king. And he could have waved the robe, and he could have been bragging, hey Saul, guess what? I could have just killed you, but I didn't. Look, here's a little piece of your robe. He could have rubbed Saul's face in it in front of all the other fighting men. Instead, he says this, "Why do you listen when men say, 'David is bent on harming you'? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed." And he still calls him Father. He says, "See, my Father, look, here's a piece of your robe that's in my hand. I cut off this corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life." David's just speaking reasonably with them, saying, listen, you may have other people around you giving you bad advice, like the guys that were with David saying, "Hey, it's your chance, go kill him," right? Saul probably had people around him saying, "Oh yeah, that David, he's becoming really popular. You're right thinking he's coming for the kingdom. You got to go get him." We don't know that. That's not in the text, but he very well could have had people whispering that in his ear. David instead says, "May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done me, but my hand will not touch you." David has such great respect for God that even when what has been promised to him by God is within his reach, he says, "I want God's will, yes, but in God's way and in God's timing." Now, David's taken a huge risk here. There's no guarantee what this outcome's going to be. I mean, Saul is already unhinged. He's already acted so irrationally, right? And with rage, and killed everybody, basically, that's around him. So David has taken a huge risk. He has no idea what's about to happen. But he says, may the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. Saul is out to kill him. David knows he's done nothing wrong. He's not even sure why he's being pursued at this point. David seeks reconciliation with Saul at great cost and risk to himself. He pursued Saul to clarify and resolve the situation if he could. Saul didn't need to fear David. David needed to fear Saul. And we're told that when David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. He said, "You are more righteous than I. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me about the good you did me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today." Saul knows it. He's known all along. He knows that he's acting poorly and that he's doing what he shouldn't do. He knows he's in the wrong. By the way, just a couple things I want to point out in here. Have any of you guys ever been in a cave? Right, Missouri's got a lot of caves. You go in there, you do the tour. There's always some spot where they turn off the light and everybody's quiet, and you can hear a pin drop. You can hear people breathing. Right, the sound really bounces and travels. So why didn't Saul hear him? Well, it doesn't tell us this, but the best that I can guess is probably not all 600 of David's men were hiding in the back of the cave. At this point, there's little gaps in the story, and so sometimes they're all together and sometimes they're splitting up. I think it's David and a handful of his guys. They're hiding in this cave, and Saul comes in, but he just comes into the very front, just the very opening of it, just basically out of eyesight of the people. And so you got 3,000 men, plus their horses, their animals, all that stuff. They're making a lot of noise outside. Saul's right there at the front. He's hearing all that noise come in. He's not hearing this little bit of noise or whispering behind him. So the other thing, Saul comes out, he's like, "Is that you, David?" Here's what I think happened. You're in the dark, right? And your eyes, your pupils dilate, your eyes try to get used to the dark. So he's got a little bit of light coming in. But he walks out, and now the sunlight that's out there. So now he's probably blinking, and all of a sudden he hears David's voice, and he turns around, and now the sun, maybe it was behind him, now it's right in his eyes. And so he can't see, and David's standing here at the opening of the cave, black behind him, so it's shadows. Saul doesn't recognize him physically, but he hears his voice, and he knows who he is. And then Saul admits to David and tells him that he knows. He says, "I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands." Now, and here's Saul, the king, asking David to swear an oath to him. He says, "Swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home. And I'd like to say they lived happily ever after. But that's not what happened. And David knew that Saul was humbled for now and mollified for now, but this wasn't the end. He knew that Saul would come back after him. So Saul continued to hide out. We're going to pick up there next week. No, Saul, after being spared, recognized that David had acted with integrity. And through his anger and his jealousy and his fear that the throne was going to be taken from him and his son, he could still see that David was more righteous than he was. David had an opportunity to compromise his values, yet he chose to honor God and live by a higher standard. His actions spoke louder than his words. And in a world that we live in today, it's the same as it was back then. The world often values success over integrity. But David chose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. He chose to live his life with integrity. And this is our calling as well. In our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities, we are constantly presented with opportunities to compromise our values and our integrity for the sake of convenience or success. But in those moments, each one of us must make a choice. What decisions will we make? Will we compromise? Or will we live as Christian men and women with integrity, as God calls us to? Please pray with me. Father, David sets a good example for each of us. But the ultimate example was set by your Son. Father, would you help us as we go throughout our days to model and imitate your Son, Jesus Christ? We ask this in his name. Amen.